Hello BookTube and welcome back to Book Trifles. This week it's mass market paperbacks. Well, paperbacks in general, but more specifically mass market paperbacks, pocketbooks, that type of thing. Again, this is not an exhaustive history of anything. It's just wide swaths of discussion and sort of curious to see what everybody else thinks on these subjects. Paperback books, as in previous videos regarding this, I talked about how they were paper covered in the 1800s, at times to pre-binding. You'd buy the text block and take it to your binder, or have the bookseller that you bought it from bind it in a sometimes generic binding, or specifically to match your library. And it continued in the 1850s in the U.S. There were dime novels that were started. They were sort of paperback books, paper covers, and yellow backs as well as later on. And, you know, in Europe, this was happening too. The French had paperback books. Germany in the early 30s worked with some paperback books. But I guess it was really the 30s was really what kicked it off. In the U.S. Specifically, was to manufacture, like the name, mass market. And there were so many different publishers, but it was a lot of them were reprinting material that was in the public domain, and cheaply on cheap paper. And where hardcover books were being sold in your proper bookstore or bookshop, the paperback books were sold anywhere and everywhere. Drugstores, pharmacies, the spinner rack type things with magazines, newsstands, at train stations. There was a whole series of train books. They were sort of termed that, and they were cheap paperbacks that came out in the late 1800s into the 20th century. Now, because magazines were being sold, and the type of books that appeared in these mass market paperbacks were like later science fiction, but detective type stuff and romance, that type of thing. And the magazines that had these stories in had lurid covers, so you had to have bright colors and that would stand out, that would get people's attention. Again, as I say, this is, you know, not in the bookstores proper. These are newsstands anywhere, you know, that they'd be sold. So that's how it was. And they were mass market, mass produced on cheap paper, as I said. And I think it was the middle of about 1935, Penguin, Alan Lane came out with the first sort of Penguin paperbacks. And George Orwell noted, and I can't remember if it's specifically in Homage to Catalonia, but it was while he was in Spain, like 36 or 37. He talked about having some of the Penguins, and he says, you know, other publishers should sort of gang up and destroy Penguin, because they, you know, this could destroy the book market because of cheap consumable, you know, fiction. And then shortly after that, he came out with their Pelican run. I've got the very first two. This is the first two volumes. It is Bernard Shaw's The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism, Capitalism, Sovietism, and Fascism. And they were sold for 6p. But these, it was published in 1937, and the book was originally published in 1928. But you see, they have dust jackets. The early ones had dust jackets, and I think a lot of the Penguins did too. But look at how crisp, colorful these are. This is from 1937, and the dust jackets are still in really good shape. Volume 1 has a little wear at the top, but Volume 2 is just extremely nice. And the other thing about these, they were sewn. They had sewn the paperbacks. That continued, for the most part, it even continued in some paperbacks up to the 70s in mass markets. But sometime around, I think in the 50s, the perfect binding, there's few misnomers as good as perfect binding, where you got the text block, and they are sort of like, well, it's just pages, but they notch the pages, and then they smear the glue on it. And that, you know, that glue from that time is getting old and will fall apart. But these, the sewn books, don't fall apart unless you rip them apart. The covers may come off, but you can actually just glue the covers back on with proper glue, that is. So yeah, so that's, and there were various sizes too. Do I have one handy? No, I don't. There were smaller ones too, like the Pocket Books. Pocket Books was actually a publisher, and they were a bit smaller than the mass market size. They were just a notch smaller. Smaller print, but unnewsprint. And as I said, they had lurid covers. And even in the I think it was in the 1950s, early or mid 1950s, it went to actually Congress, or maybe in front of you know, the HUAC type thing. The you know, it wasn't Hollywood, but, you know, checking for communism and things like that. It might have been all part of that, but they questioned the luridness of paperbacks. And that also, I think, was all combined with, you know, the comic book, whatever it was called, the Comic Book Act type thing, where EC Comics were slapped hard for, you know, having horrible material for young people. But here's an example of sort of the lurid covers. This is from 1961, so we're getting on a little bit. This is a British publisher, Digit Books. And this is A.E. Van Vogt, the Weapon Makers. Actually, if you, at 5 o'clock today, where this is go up Saturday at 5, British Standard Time, I will be talking about this cover, this artist, and so forth, in a video. For Paperback Parade. You're asking what Paperback Parade is? Well, you have to wait till 5 o'clock to find out. So yeah, so I guess, you know, there is almost a demise of the mass market paperback. They've changed sizes at various times. There's now ones that are a little taller and they're narrower, and then they've mostly gone to the larger size paperbacks. And why am my brain blanking on the name of them? Trade paperbacks, you know, and larger size as well. But there's still holdouts that are making mass market paperbacks. And is it a dead, would you say it's a dead format? Or is it still endures? And it definitely is collectible because of these lurid type covers. And there are, you know, there's more lurid ones than this, because the ones that were popular like in the 40s and 50s, as things started rolling along, was science fiction, crime, romance, and I think they called it sort of delinquent publishers, where you've got semi-pornographic and lesbian, homosexual subjects that were sort of sold under the counter to a certain extent. And some of those have very lurid covers. Or even just look at the very first Harlequins had quite lurid covers as well. And very good artwork on those as well. And we just, you know, they've become collectible, but they were not made to be sort of long lasting. That's the thing, because of the paper that they were made on. The penguin and the pelican is still, it's browned a bit, but it's still supple and it's still good. But the majority of them are in rough shape now because they weren't, as I say, people did not keep care of them, and they were used and abused all the way through. So it's difficult to get ones in really good shape, older ones, and the prices are going up because they are becoming collectible and disappearing into collections. And as I say, the publishing, they didn't really get into paperback so much until the late 40s, 50s in the US for science fiction. And in the UK, they started a bit earlier. So, and, you know, it's super... It took the place, a lot of the paperback publishing here in the UK for science fiction and the niche sort of genres took the place of the pulp magazines or the magazines that were in the US. So the magazines, you know, held higher sway in the US for a longer period of time before paperbacks started picking up steam than here in the UK. But again, these are wide and sort of generalizations I'm making here as well. But yeah, do you like paperbacks? Do you like the covers? Do you like the lurid covers? Do you like the size of them for reading and the convenience of them? Do you have problems with the font size because they are smaller and sometimes they have very small font? Do you think that they will endure even though ebooks and you know, trade paperbacks have sort of taken over for the most part? I'd love to know your opinions. And do you collect any of these? And do you prefer to buy an old mass market paperback? And if so, why? Do you like the sewn ones? Do you search out the sewn paperbacks? That type of thing. I'd love to know. So let me know in the comments. Thank you, BookTube.